Settlers were beating my mom for being Chinese. A Chinese girl and boy came to a giant mountain man and cried, "Please save her." The mountain still held winter in its bones, though the meadows below whispered of spring. Patches of snow clung to the shaded slopes, icy rivulets gushed down gullies, and the sharp scent of thawing pine needles mixed with smoke from scattered cabins. He walked the trail alone, as he often did, broad-shouldered, long-bearded, a man who had made peace with silence. His rifle rested easy in his hand, and every step fell with the patience of someone used to surviving seasons, storms, and solitude. The stillness broke with the sound of frantic feet. Small, quick, desperate. From the bend of the trail came two children, breathless, faces streaked with dirt and tears. A girl, perhaps 9, her braids undone, her cotton dress clinging with sweat. Beside her a boy of 7, trembling, his cheeks blotched red, his thin shirt too thin for the mountain air. They stumbled toward him, gasping as though the whole world had been chasing them. The girl cried first. "Please." Her voice cracked, higher than it should have been for her age. "They're hurting Mama. They're killing her." The boy only clutched her hand tighter, nodding furiously, eyes wild. The man dropped to a crouch, his shadow falling over them like a wall. His voice, low and gravel-lined, carried calm even against their terror. "Who?" "Settlers," the girl sobbed. "In town. They say she don't belong. They hit her. Please, mister. Please come." Something shifted in his chest. Not surprise. He had seen cruelty too often to be surprised. Not hesitation. He had lived by a code that didn't need words. He rose, rifle steady, and turned down the trail without another question. The children followed, tripping to keep up, hope chasing their terror. The town lay nestled at the edge of the valley, where wagon ruts cut deep into the thawing mud and cabins leaned against one another like quarrelsome kin. As he neared, the sound reached him first. Jeers, laughter sharp as whips, the dull thud of a body struck. Then a cry, choked and breathless. The children whimpered, but he kept walking, his long strides unhurried yet unstoppable, the kind of gait that carried storms with it. The square opened before them. A ring of settlers, faces flushed from drink and self-righteous fury, circled around a woman crumpled on the ground. Her black hair spilled loose, hiding her face, her prairie dress torn and muddied. She bent over herself, arms shielding her ribs as boots and fists rained down. Men shouted slurs, women spat curses, children pointed and mocked. A lantern swung from a post, casting a harsh yellow glow that seemed to harden every cruel face. The man stopped at the edge of the circle. His eyes, pale as winter sky, swept the mob. Not one looked at him yet. They were too lost in their frenzy, too eager in their sport. He took one step forward, then another. The children's mother lifted her head just enough for her dark eyes to show, wide with pain, and in that moment she saw him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He only kept walking until his bulk pressed against the ring of settlers. Someone finally noticed. "What's this?" A man slurred, turning, his hand still curled from striking. "Big feller, ain't ya? You got business here." No answer. Just the crack of a rifle but slamming into the man's jaw. He fell like a sack, blood spilling from his split lip. Silence rippled outward. The crowd stiffened, shifting uneasily, but anger returned quick. Another man swung a fist. The mountain man caught it midair, crushed it in his grip until bones popped, and shoved him backward into the mud. Then, without pause, he stepped deeper, parting the crowd by force of presence and violence alike. "Leave her," he growled, voice low as thunder rolling down stone. They hesitated. Some spat, others muttered, but no one wanted to be the next broken jaw. Still, pride is poison. One of the younger settlers, his face red and slick with drink, lunged with a knife. The man turned his rifle sideways and cracked the boy across the temple so hard he crumpled with a groan. By then, silence had spread. Only the rain of blood from the woman's nose and the shuddering sobs of her children broke it. The mountain man crouched beside her, his shadow covering her small, battered body. Her breath came ragged. Her lips trembled with words unsaid. He slid his rifle across his back, then lifted her as though she weighed no more than a child. She gasped at the movement, but her arms, weak and bloodied, clung to his shirt with desperate instinct. The settlers drew back, shame and fury twisting their faces. None dared move. The girl and boy rushed forward, clinging to their mother's skirts as they trailed behind. The mountain man stepped through the crowd, shoulders squared, eyes daring anyone to block him. None did. One woman whispered a prayer, or perhaps a curse. Boots shuffled in mud, but no hand rose again. At the edge of the square, the girl tugged at his sleeve. "Sir, your cabin. Is it far?" "Far enough," he muttered. His steps didn't slow. The road out of town lay in silence, save for the woman's faint moans and the patter of children's feet. The air grew colder as they climbed, the valley fading below, the pine-heavy slopes darkening with dusk. He carried her as though her brokenness weighed less than his resolve. Each breath she took seemed a fragile tether to life, each shiver a reminder of how near death had stood. The children whispered to her, trying to keep her awake, their little voices rising and falling like flickering flames against the vast silence of the mountain night. At last, the lantern lights of town fell behind, swallowed by trees. They pressed deeper into the forest where shadows stretched long, the scent of wet earth strong. An owl hooted, distant. A wolf answered with a mournful cry. Only then did the man pause, adjusting her weight in his arms. Her head rested against his chest, eyes half-lidded, lips pale. He could feel the heat of fever in her skin, the tremble of exhaustion in her limbs. The children clung to his coat, looking up with wide, desperate eyes. "Will Mama die?" the boy whispered. The man looked down at him, then at the girl whose braids had come loose in the wind. He didn't answer with words. He simply shifted his grip, holding their mother tighter, and began the climb toward his cabin once more. The mountain path narrowed, lined with dripping furs and tangled brush. Every step carried them higher into the wild, where men seldom dared follow. The storm that had threatened all day finally broke. Rain fell, cold and relentless, soaking through clothes, plastering hair, chilling bone. The children shivered but pressed on, following the sound of his boots on stone. She stirred once, whispering in a tongue the children understood but he did not. They answered her softly, promising she'd be safe, promising he would not let her fall. And though he could not understand their words, he understood the weight. When the cabin came into sight, a dark silhouette against lightning, relief swept the children like warmth after frost. Smoke from the chimney curled faint but steady. The mountain man shouldered open the door, carried her inside, and laid her on the narrow bed by the fire. The children clambered close, pulling blankets around her, whispering her name as though it might anchor her to the world. He stood back, water dripping from his beard, rifle across his back, and watched the firelight crawl over her bruised face. He had dragged many animals from the edge of death, tended wounds in storms and snow, but never had the sight of suffering felt so sharp in his chest. Outside, thunder rolled across the ridges. Inside, the fire crackled. The children clung to her hands, their small fingers laced with hers. For the first time in years, the cabin did not feel like a place of solitude. It felt like a place of waiting, fragile and trembling, as though every breath might break or mend the world. And as the storm deepened, far below in the valley, a lantern flickered where the town's road cut through the dark. A single rider paused at the edge of the trees, watching the mountain, before turning his horse toward the ridges. The cabin walls groaned against the storm through the night, rain drumming on the roof like 1,000 fists, wind clawing at the shutters. Inside, firelight carved a small circle of warmth, the smoke-sweet scent of pine logs thick in the air. The mountain man crouched beside the narrow bed, rough hands steady as he pressed a damp cloth to her bruised temple. She flinched at the touch but did not pull away. Her breath trembled shallow, every rise and fall of her chest a reminder of how close she had come to being lost. The children stayed tight to her sides. The girl stroked her mother's hair with small, trembling fingers, whispering words in Chinese too soft for the man to understand. The boy pressed his cheek against her arm as though afraid she might vanish if he loosened his hold. Their whispers were like the rustle of sparrows, fragile, constant. The man's hands worked without hurry. He boiled water, tore strips from an old linen shirt, crushed herbs he had gathered in spring's first thaw. He had no words to offer, but his care was a language older than speech. He lifted her gently to dab her wounds, braced her ribs with bandages, laid a pelt across her shoulders when shivers seized her. Each motion carried the gravity of someone who had known loss and would not allow it again, not if his strength could stand between her and death. She opened her eyes once, dark pupils glistening in the flicker of fire. Her lips parted, a whisper forming. Xie, xie. Her voice was faint, broken. He paused, looking into her gaze, and though he did not know the word, he understood. He gave a single nod, then returned to his work. By dawn, the storm had ebbed. The world outside smelled of wet earth and sap, clouds breaking to reveal streaks of pale gold. The woman drifted in and out of sleep, her breathing more even. The children, exhausted, dozed curled at her sides. The mountain man sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, his eyes on the embers as though guarding them was the same as guarding the fragile lives within his walls. When she stirred, he rose, poured water into a tin cup, and lifted her head so she could sip. She winced, but swallowed. The children's eyes opened at once, watching every motion with animal alertness. The girl spoke softly. "Mama, safe now." Then she looked at the man, her small chin lifted, courage hiding behind her fear. "Thank you, mister." He grunted, setting the cup aside. Words had never been his strength. He moved instead to the hearth, ladled stew from the iron pot, and set bowls before them. The children ate cautiously, spoons clinking against tin, while their mother nibbled at softened bread he had soaked in broth. The cabin filled with quiet sounds of eating, the crackle of fire, the drip of rain outside. It was not peace, too much pain lingered, but it was a kind of truce with the world. Later, when the sun climbed high enough to send light streaming through the chinks in the walls, the children explored the cabin's corners. They touched the carved wooden horse on the shelf, the stack of pelts folded neat, the row of jars filled with herbs and roots. The boy tried on a fur cap far too big for his head, stumbling beneath its weight until his sister giggled for the first time since he had seen her. The sound was thin but real, a spark against the ashes of fear. Their mother watched from the bed, lips curving faintly. She raised her hand and beckoned them back, smoothing their hair, kissing their foreheads with cracked lips. Her eyes glistened when she looked toward the man, though she quickly dropped her gaze. Gratitude and uncertainty mingled in her silence. Through the day, he worked outside, chopping wood, checking traps, carrying water. The children followed him to the doorway, watching as his axe bit deep into pine, muscles rolling beneath his shirt. He worked without pause, each motion measured, as though the rhythm itself was a shield. They whispered to each other, perhaps speaking of his size, his silence, his strength. When he returned, sweat darkening his collar, he found them standing at the hearth trying to stir the pot of beans. They froze when he entered, wide-eyed, expecting reprimand. Instead, he only set his hand on the girl's shoulder and adjusted the ladle's grip. His touch was heavy, but not unkind. Together they stirred, and for a moment it seemed as though the three of them belonged to the same small ritual of survival. That evening, the woman tried to rise, insisting in halting English that she help. "I can work." Her voice cracked with strain. "You'll rest," he said simply, steadying her back against the bed. She looked as if she might argue, but her ribs betrayed her, and she sank down, breath shallow. The children tucked blankets tighter around her, and she allowed it, though shame flickered in her eyes. As dusk fell, the cabin grew warm with firelight. They ate together, beans, cornbread, strips of smoked venison. The children ate eagerly, hunger overtaking their reserve. The man ate slower, his gaze flicking between them, measuring, learning. Afterward, the girl shyly offered to wash the dishes. She carried them to the basin with her brother, hands clumsy, water sloshing. He let them try, their small shoulders hunched in concentration. The woman smiled faintly, watching, before sleep claimed her again. Night settled heavy. The wind outside rattled branches, but inside, quiet reigned. The children lay curled on pelts near the hearth, their breathing soft. The man sat by the fire, staring into its shifting colors, the knife in his hands catching glints of orange. He thought of the woman's battered face, of the way the settler's rage had burned hotter than the storm. He thought of the children's desperate eyes. Something in him, long dormant, stirred with their presence, a reminder of what he had lost, and of what might still be protected. The crack of a branch outside drew his attention. He rose, moved to the door, opened it a crack. The night smelled of wet earth and pine. He saw nothing but the shadows of trees and the glimmer of stars beyond thinning clouds. Yet the unease remained. He closed the door, bolted it, and returned to the fire. The children shifted in their sleep but did not wake. He laid another log on the flames and kept watch until dawn. The following morning brought pale sunlight and the fresh scent of pine needles warming under the first true breath of spring. The woman tried again to rise, this time managing to stand with his support. She clutched his arm, trembling, but remained upright. Her children clapped quietly, proud of her strength. She gave them a small smile before sinking back to the bed. The girl, emboldened, began sweeping the cabin with a bundle of pine twigs. The boy carried kindling, his steps determined though his arms were small. Their work was uneven, but earnest. The man allowed it, his eyes softening almost imperceptibly. As the day stretched, the silence between them grew less heavy. The woman whispered broken phrases in English, thank, food, good, fire. He answered with nods or short words. The children bridged the gap, translating in giggles, mixing their mother's tongue with his, a strange but gentle weaving of sound. At one point, the girl touched his carved wooden horse and asked, yours? He hesitated, then said, my brother's, long gone. His voice carried no explanation beyond that. The children grew quiet, sensing the weight in his tone, and returned the toy carefully to its place. That night, they sat closer to the fire together. The woman hummed a tune in Chinese, soft as drifting smoke. The children joined, their voices high and sweet. The man listened, head bowed, knife stilled in his hands. The melody seeped into the cabin's timbers, a fragile claim of life against the dark. When the song ended, silence hung, but it was not empty. It was shared. The next morning, he walked the ridgeline to check his snares. The forest smelled of thaw and sap. Birds darted through branches, calling sharp and bright. He found boot prints near the stream, fresh, too deep for hunters. His jaw tightened. Someone had been close, watching. He returned to the cabin, set his rifle by the door, and said nothing. The children played outside, gathering early wildflowers, their laughter brief but ringing. The woman sat by the fire, sewing torn fabric with careful stitches despite her bruised hands. When she glanced up, she caught his expression and stiffened. He shook his head slightly, signaling silence. She lowered her gaze, but fear returned to her features. That evening, as the sun bled orange behind the ridges, he stood outside, eyes on the valley. Below, faint but certain, a lantern flickered on the trail. A rider moved through the trees, pausing, searching. The mountain man's grip tightened on his rifle. Inside, the children laughed, their voices unguarded for the first time. The woman hummed again, fragile but steady. He stood in the twilight, torn between the peace within and the threat beyond, knowing the storm was far from over. The days that followed carried a fragile rhythm, as if the cabin itself had learned to breathe more carefully with the weight of 4 souls within its walls. Spring edged further into the high ridges, loosening ice from branches, sending clear streams gushing through gullies, filling the air with the sharp scent of thaw. Yet even as the land softened, something hard lingered in the air, an unspoken question of how long this sanctuary could hold. The woman's body healed in fragments. Bruises purpled, yellowed, and faded. Her ribs remained tender, each breath reminding her of the boots that had crushed them. Still, she moved with quiet determination, rising to tend the fire, to stir stew, to mend what little clothing her children owned. Her English faltered but grew steadier, syllables halting like steps on uneven ground. Thank, food. Children, safe. You, good man. The mountain man seldom answered with more than a nod. Yet each time her gaze lingered on him, he found it harder to look away. Something in her eyes, dark pools reflecting both fear and unyielding strength, stirred places in him long walled off by solitude. He had lived years with only trees and storms for company, and now the weight of her silence pressed deeper than any blizzard. One evening, when the children slept curled beneath pelts by the fire, she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost afraid to break the hush. "My husband, he die. In mine." She pressed her hand to her chest as if steadying a wound older than bruises. Rock fall. Many men. No help. He sat still, knife paused mid-sharpen, listening. The fire snapped, filling her pauses. "We come here. I wash clothes." "Oh." "People look." She searched for the word, lips pressing together before she found it. "Different." The last word trembled, bitterness clinging to its edge. "They spit. Say we don't belong. My children hungry. I work. I bow. Still they are beat." Her voice broke. She turned her face toward the wall, ashamed of tears. The mountain man set down his knife, the steel ringing softly against stone. He did not touch her. He had learned that sometimes silence carried more comfort than hands. Instead, he let the fire's glow fill the space between them until her sobs ebbed into breaths again. When she finally glanced back, her children stirred faintly, as though even in dreams they heard her pain. She reached to tuck the blanket closer around them, her hand trembling. "I hide for them. Always for them." The mountain man studied the children's faces, soft, unguarded in sleep. He understood. He had seen wolves circle calves, had seen storms flatten cabins. But there was a cruelty in men that nature itself could not match. The next day, as sunlight laced through fir branches, a trader stopped by the cabin. His mule carried bundles of cloth and tinware, his face gaunt from travel. He greeted the mountain man with wary respect, but his eyes widened when he saw the woman and children. "You've taken them in," he muttered, scratching his beard. His voice held no judgment, only a kind of grim wonder. "You'll draw trouble, friend. Men in town are already spitting mad. Say you shamed them. Say you stole their fun." The mountain man's jaw tightened. "What else?" The trader shifted uncomfortably. "They drink and talk. Say they'll come riding one night. Finish what they started. They don't stomach losing face to the likes of her." His gaze flicked toward the woman, who stood half-hidden behind the hearth, her children clutching her skirts. "You'd best be ready." The man paid for flour and salt without a word. The trader left quickly, boots crunching on pine needles, the sound fading down the ridge. That night, the woman sat sewing by the fire, her hands trembling as the needle pierced fabric. "They come?" she asked. "Yes." Her eyes closed, lashes trembling against her cheeks. "We leave. No safer out there." She nodded faintly, though fear hollowed her face. Her children leaned into her, sensing more than they understood. From then on, preparation filled the hours. The mountain man set snares near the trails, stacked wood into barricades, checked the rifle's flint and powder. He taught the children to stay low, to follow their mother if he told them. They listened wide-eyed, solemn as elders. The woman tried to help. Despite her pain, she gathered herbs from the slopes, boiled them into teas, whispered to her children how to stay quiet, how to hide. Her strength returned not in grand gestures but in persistence, in the way she refused to collapse though her body begged for rest. One afternoon, as they sat outside beneath the pale sun, the children picked wildflowers and brought them to her. She braided them together, weaving yellow against purple, her bruised fingers steady at last. She placed the crown on her daughter's head, then another on her son's. Their laughter rose light against the wind, and for a moment the mountain seemed to hold its breath. The mountain man watched from the doorway, the sight pressing against his ribs like something he had forgotten how to feel. The woman glanced up, catching his gaze, and for the first time she did not look away. A fragile trust, unspoken, passed between them. But trust could not silence the signs of danger. Boot prints appeared again by the stream. A snare was cut clean, left dangling. The children's laughter died quickly when they saw the tension in the mountain man's jaw. One evening, as dusk spread violet across the ridges, he returned with a deer slung over his shoulder. As he laid it down, the woman approached timidly, her children at her side. "Why?" she asked, her voice searching. "Why help me?" He paused, wiping blood from his knife. His eyes met hers, steady, because no one else did. Her breath caught. She touched her chest, then bowed her head. "We owe you." "No," he said, softer than she expected. "You owe me nothing." She did not answer, but her eyes shone in the firelight, gratitude and grief twined together. The next day, the air felt charged, as though the mountain itself waited. Crows gathered in the trees, their cries harsh. The woman hummed softly as she worked, but the tune faltered each time the wind shifted. The children sensed it too, clinging closer to her skirts, their games subdued. At sunset, a storm gathered on the horizon, clouds bruising the sky. The mountain man stood at the doorway, rifle in hand, watching the valley below. In the distance, faint but undeniable, lanterns flickered, one, then another, weaving like fireflies through the trees. The woman came to stand beside him, her breath catching when she saw. Her hand trembled against the doorframe. "They come." "Yes." Behind them, the children pressed close, eyes wide, small hands clutching each other. The storm rolled nearer, thunder rumbling through the ridges like drums of war. Rain began to spit against the roof. The cabin's fire glowed warm, but its light felt fragile against the dark pressing in. Inside, the woman gathered her children, whispering prayers in her own tongue. The mountain man checked the powder horn, slid the knife into his belt, stacked another log on the fire. His face was carved of stone, but inside his chest something pounded, not of fear but of inevitability. He had lived long enough to know that some storms cannot be outlasted, they must be met head-on. The children clung tighter to their mother. She looked toward him, her voice barely more than breath. "You protect." He turned, eyes steady as steel, and gave a single nod. Thunder cracked. Lanterns moved closer, their glow threading the trees. The first shouts echoed faintly, carried on the storm wind, men's voices thick with anger, slurred with drink, eager for cruelty. The mountain man's grip tightened on the rifle. The woman pulled her children against her chest, whispering their names as though they might be shield enough. The cabin walls, thick with pine, trembled in the gale, yet within them a fire burned bright. And as the storm broke full against the mountain, the sound of hooves rose from the valley, thundering upward, closer, until it seemed the whole ridge shook with the weight of their coming. The storm came fast, sweeping up the valley in sheets of rain and rattling the pine tops until they shivered like frightened things. Wind howled across the ridges, slamming against the cabin walls, pressing water through every seam. Inside, the fire burned stubbornly, a circle of warmth against the roar outside. But it was not the storm that drew every heart tight. It was the glow of lanterns weaving up the trail, their light bobbing like predators' eyes in the dark. The mountain man stood at the door, rifle resting against his shoulder, eyes narrowed to slits. His breath moved slow, steady, though each beat of his heart struck like a hammer. Behind him, the children clung to their mother, their whispers lost against the wind. The woman's gaze fixed on the door, fear widening her pupils until they gleamed black as obsidian. She whispered a word in her tongue, over and over, clutching her children as though repetition could weave a shield around them. The first horse broke from the tree line, its rider hunched against the rein, a lantern swinging from his hand. Behind him came others, their shouts carried ragged by thunder. 6 men in all, swollen with drink and vengeance, their voices spitting rage even as the storm drowned them. They rode into the clearing, hooves sinking in mud, steam rising from their mounts in the cold downpour. The leader, broad in chest, with a scar down one cheek, pulled his horse to a halt before the cabin. He spat into the mud and shouted, "You in there! Hand over the woman. She's ours by right." The mountain man's voice carried through the door, low and steady. "No." Laughter rose from the riders, bitter and cruel. One waved a pistol, firing into the air. The cracks split through thunder, startling the children to tears. Their mother pulled them close, whispering their names, rocking as if to steady their terror. The scarred man sneered, raising his voice. "You think you can keep her? You think you can shame us and walk away? You're nothing but a beast in the hills. We'll burn this place to the ground with all of you inside." The mountain man opened the door, stepping into the storm. Rain plastered his hair against his forehead, streamed down his beard, soaked his shirt until it clung to the heavy lines of muscle. The rifle gleamed dark in his hands. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Leave now, or you won't leave at all." For a heartbeat, silence held. Rain hissed in the firelight that spilled from the cabin. Thunder rolled like drums across the ridges. Then the leader spat again, drew his pistol, and charged. The mountain man fired once. The blast roared, echoing against cliffs. The horse reared, the rider toppled into mud, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Chaos broke. The others surged forward, shouting curses, steel flashing in the lantern light. The fight slammed into the clearing with the fury of the storm. Rifle shots cracked, pistols barked, the stench of gunpowder mixed with wet earth and blood. One man lunged with a knife, only to be caught by the mountain man's fist, a blow that sent him sprawling face first into mud. Another fired wildly, bullets shattering a window, showering the children in shards of glass. Their screams pierced the night. Their mother pulled them beneath the bed, pressing their faces into her skirts, whispering prayers even as her own body shook. The mountain man fought like the storm itself, brutal, unrelenting, each strike a force of nature. His rifle but cracked against a skull, his knife flashed, his boot drove an attacker back into the mud. Rain slicked his skin, lightning lit his frame in jagged silver. Yet for every man he felled, another pressed forward, driven by drink and rage. One burst through the cabin door, dripping mud, pistol raised. The woman reacted without thought. She seized the kettle from the fire, hurling its boiling contents into his face. He screamed, dropping the pistol, clawing at his blistering skin. She shoved him backward with all her frail strength, the children shrieking in terror and fury alike. Another attacker dragged her by the arm, yanking her from the hearth. She clawed, kicked, teeth bared in desperation. Before he could strike her down, the mountain man tore him away, slamming him against the wall so hard the logs shuddered. The man slumped, unconscious, blood running from his brow. Outside, lightning split the sky, striking a pine at the clearing's edge. The tree exploded in sparks, fire racing through its sap, and with a deafening crack it toppled, crushing one horse beneath its bulk. The beast screamed before falling silent, the rider thrown limp into the mud. The others staggered, fear flickering at last in their eyes. The mountain man stood over the fallen, chest heaving, mud and blood streaking his arms. He lifted his rifle, barrel gleaming, and growled, "Enough!" The scarred leader, clutching his wound, spat through the rain. "You'll pay for this. We'll bring more. Burn your cabin, burn your mountain. She'll die screaming." The mountain man leveled the rifle, its muzzle aimed square at the man's chest. "Not tonight." For a long breath, the storm howled louder than men. Then the riders broke, fear scattering them like crows. They hauled the wounded, left their dead, and vanished into the trees, lanterns bobbing frantic in the downpour until even their curses faded. Silence dropped heavy, broken only by the storm's fury. The mountain man lowered his rifle, his hands trembling now that the rage had passed. His breath came ragged, steam rising from his skin in the cold rain. He turned back toward the cabin, where firelight spilled weakly through shattered glass. Inside, the woman clutched her children, rocking them as they sobbed. Her hair clung wet to her face, her bruises dark in the glow. When she saw him, her lips parted, her eyes shining not only with fear but with something else, trust, fierce and trembling. She reached out a hand. He stepped inside, closing the broken door behind him. The storm still raged, but within the cabin, the fire glowed bright. He set the rifle aside and knelt by her, his hand closing around hers, rough against delicate skin. She did not flinch. The children stared up at him, eyes wide, chests hitching with sobs. Slowly, they leaned against him, small shoulders pressing into his arm. He let them, his gaze never leaving their mother's. No words passed, but something unspoken settled between them, a bond forged not by choice, but by blood and storm and the cruelty they had survived together. Hours passed before the storm quieted. Rain softened to a drizzle, thunder faded to distant echoes. The cabin smelled of smoke, wet earth, and iron. The dead lay in the mud outside, the living clung to each other within. At dawn, the mountain rose clear, its slopes washed clean, mist curling from ravines like breath from a sleeping giant. Birds sang tentatively, as if testing the silence. The woman stirred from shallow sleep, her children still curled against her. She rose slowly, every bruise ached, but her back was straighter. She crossed the cabin, knelt by the fire, and began to tend it with careful hands. The mountain man watched from the doorway, his silhouette framed by the pale gold of sunrise. His body bore cuts and bruises, his clothes torn, but his eyes were steady. He looked at her as though seeing something more than a survivor, something whole beginning to rise from brokenness. The children woke, blinking at the light, their laughter fragile but real when their mother handed them bread warmed by the fire. The sound lifted into the rafters, startling in its brightness. The mountain man turned his face toward it, listening as though it was the first song he'd heard in years. When the woman looked back at him, there was no longer only fear in her gaze. There was a question, unspoken but clear. Could this place, could this man, hold them safe against the world's cruelty? He gave no answer, only stepped into the cabin, closed the broken door against the wind, and laid another log on the fire. The flames leapt higher, warm and defiant. Far down the valley, where the trail wound toward town, the last of the settlers' hoofprints filled slowly with rainwater, fading into the mud. But in the ridges above, in the cabin that had held against storm and hate alike, something new took root. The mountain man sat with them, the children pressed close, the woman beside him, her hand resting against his. Together they watched the fire, each flame licking upward a promise that the night had not won. And as the sun climbed higher, flooding the cabin with light, the mountain seemed to whisper its own vow, that those who had been cast aside could still find shelter, still carve a home from the wild, still rise unbroken. Yet beyond the ridges, whispers would carry, rumors would spread. Men who had fled in shame would not stay silent forever. The storm they had survived was only the first. For now, though, in the glow of morning, in the fragile hush after violence, they were together. And that was enough.